Hello, welcome to this discussion today reflecting on pharmacy funding, hosted by Pharmacy Business. And this is really timely as we've just heard about the funding arrangements for 26, 27, and pharmacy contractors will no doubt be considering what the agreement means to them now. We've got a really influential group of guests here today, and I'm sure we're going to have a lively discussion. So I would like to welcome first Janet Morrison, Chief Executive from Community Pharmacy England. Thanks for being with us, Janet.
Thank you.
We also have Olivier Picard from the National Pharmacy Association. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, good morning.
Next, Reena Barai from G Barai Pharmacy in Sutton. Hi, Reena.
Morning.
And Shilpa Shah, Community Pharmacy North East London. Hi, Shilpa. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
And Malcolm Harrison from the Company Chemists Association.
Good morning.
Hello. Thank you all. Thank you so much. We're really pleased to have you all here on what is, I'm sure, a really busy week. And I'm very aware it's a really busy time. Just to set the context, which of course everyone is very familiar with all of this now, the Community Pharmacy Contractual Framework for 2026 was announced very recently, and that includes a 10.3% uplift, a write-off of a proportion of overspend, the introduction of independent prescribing to Pharmacy First and the pharmacy contraception service. And having all of this agreed may be good news in some sense for contractors, I'm thinking, but all the pharmacy bodies have been really clear that there remains a significant funding gap for the sector. So am I right in thinking maybe the path ahead still looks pretty bleak? I know we're all keen today to look at it all from the contractor's point of view. What's next? How can teams deal with this situation? We all know the flaws in the pharmacy funding system and problems with supply, etc. And there are now plans to work towards reform. But what can be done by contractors now and the sector's leaders? And I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Thank you so much. So if I start with a question to get us all talking about how has all this been received by contractors? The agreement's been out for a few days, and I know there's been plenty of discussion going on. Janet, you're on a roadshow around the country. What's the response been from pharmacy contractors and owners maybe that you've spoken to? I thought maybe we could look at positive points and negative points. Janet, would you like to start?
Yeah, on the positive points, I guess we've met over 600 contractors this week. So we've got very firm feedback on their sentiments, and they're actually evenly balanced between disappointed and better than expected, basically. And I've got the word cloud and I can see that's exactly how it is. I think on the positive side, people were recognising that community pharmacy has been given preferential treatment again after last year where we get the best deal in the NHS. This is the best deal in primary care, and they recognise that ministers are prioritising us, and importantly that there's a commitment to work together to go beyond this 1 year cycle of sticking plaster settlements to look at reform, to inform a strategy for community pharmacy, and to look at the reform of the contract funding and reimbursement. So genuinely, I think there's been some very positive feeling that we're on a path and we have the opportunity to work in partnership with government to find solutions for the longer term in terms of sustainability and a better operating environment.
Thank you. Malcolm, did you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I think the response I've had from members is it's a welcome step, but I don't think anybody can be pretending that it resolves the underlying problems facing contractors in the network as a whole. I think businesses are feeling rather flat and, if I'm honest, a little bit underwhelmed. And I think it's important to try and understand the reaction, and we need to consider the context. If you look back just to 2023, just 3 years ago, the contract was valued at 2.6 billion. It's now 3.6 billion, which on the face of it sounds really good, but I think we need to remember that the contract sat at 2.6 billion for the previous 7 years. And if we look at the value of the contract from where it was before the cuts in 2016 to where it is today, we would expect from inflationary growth to see a contract valued at about 3.9. And if you then add on volumetric growth from NHS items, it's about 4.7. So we're still a long way away from where we are. So whilst members are pleased to see an increase in core funding, to see addition to the retained margin, a write-off of some of the over-earn and the introduction of independent prescribing, we've still a long way to go to stabilise where we need to be.
Thank you very much. Shilpa, would you want to go next? Positives and negatives?
Yeah, I think Janet and Malcolm have summed it up really well, but it feels as though whilst when the contract was first announced last week, there was a little bit of noise on all the different WhatsApp groups and people talking and messaging. But, you know, underwhelm feels like the right kind of response, because I feel like people have gone like, okay, well, you know, maybe we weren't expecting a lot and we've not maybe got exactly what we wanted. I think some of it is also around just lots of questions. So some of the negativity around, you know, people are really happy that independent prescribing is on the contract, but they're not happy with the remuneration associated with it because it feels that it's no different to some of the work that we do already. And so it's about understanding, what does that mean? What does that mean for people who aren't independent prescribers at the moment? Are we going to create a two-tier system? Again, the protected learning time, something that many of us have been asking for years now. It's great that it's on there, but there's still a lot of questions around, what does this mean if I close for a few hours each month to do that? Will, you know, neighbouring contractors you know, get my business, etc. So I think there's just still a lot of unanswered questions, and you know, we need to go through the detail and really help people understand what they may need to do differently in their business to make sure that they get through the next year before we hear about the next contract.
Yeah, great, good points. Thank you, Olivier. How's it
Yes.
looking on your side?
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, I guess when I talk to independent pharmacy owners, there are several feelings. The first one is relief. You know, credit where it's due. The settlement is better than many people expected. 10.3% in the current economic climate is great. Write-off of historic margin is something that the sector has been asking for a very long time. And it seems that ministers have listened to the concern for pharmacy. But that didn't happen by accident. You know, we've been lobbying MPs. The NPA has been engaged in the media for a long time, and that has been a contributing factor towards the amount of money that has been put to the sector. But the second really feeling that I'm hearing is concern. Concern because, as we've already talked about, this doesn't close the gap between the current funding and the independent economic analysis. And someone told me that the gap, they calculated that the gap had reduced by 1% this year. So at the current rate, it would take 100 years to finally close the funding gap. And I think people don't have quite that amount of time. And then the other thing that contractors have been telling me about is the bit on independent prescribing. There are some very big concern around actually what is being proposed. You know, it's a huge shift. The contractors are worried about the economics. You know, can we do a consultation for £17? You know, a pharmacist without a full clinical note will take 20 to 30 minutes to do a consultation. So, you know, you could say that the NHS values the work of a pharmacist between £30 to £50. You know, it costs me more to employ an independent prescriber. So again, you know, a lot of people are very concerned about that. I think the final bit really is around the margin issue. You know, we don't know how much we are going to retain from the margin, but actually it goes a little bit deeper than that. The government deserves credit for writing off £239 million of historical margin delivery, but that money has already been earned by contractors. It's already in their accounts last year. So technically, last year we got £1.139 billion of margin, and this year we've been offered £1.1 billion when you take into account the 200 million. So the question I have really is is this increase in margin really an increase, and have contractors really understood what's at stake here? And perhaps Janet can help us answer that question. So in summary, is it a positive or a negative deal? Well, my answer is both. It's better than many expected, but it probably doesn't solve the underlying problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Janet, I'll come back to you, but Reena, what's your perspective on things?
Yeah, and I think I've got a slightly different view. I agree with everything everyone said, actually. And I guess my positive is the conversation around reform. It's something we've been banging on for ages. We cannot do today's work with yesterday's ideas, solutions, and funding. Pharmacy has changed drastically from when the funding mechanisms, reimbursement, remuneration models were created. And we really, really need a significant reform conversation, just not a nice conversation, a really tough one where we do some economic analysis of different models for funding, different ways of maybe having different tiers of contracts of different pharmacy models. The time has come to have this conversation because we've seen so many closures. We know that the model isn't working and something needs to change. So that for me is a real positive, as long as it is a real good conversation and it does create the change that's needed. And I guess my negative is the unpredictability. I still can't tell if I'll be able to pay my wholesaler bills in months to come. I still can't tell if I can afford to take on staff. I still can't tell if I will have a pharmacy in a few years' time that I can invest in and I can, redo. And, I want new signs. I want to pay for marketing. I want to maybe put in a new consultation room, maybe take on more staff. I can't predict these things. It's a really impossible way to run a business. And so the unpredictability of the announcement and the funding streams coming through to me is what's keeping me awake at night right now.
Thank you. Janet, would you like to come back on any of those points?
Of course. The committee, it was a really difficult decision. And I think a number of people have said publicly that when they came to the meeting, they changed their minds several times during the discussion, trying to work out where to land. And there was a lot of sympathy in the committee for taking more radical action and stronger approach. But they weighed it up and felt that they needed to build on this deal, and the fact that ministers committed to this programme of work to really look about where we're going and looking at sustainability was incredibly important. But it wasn't an easy decision. And all of my committee are contractors, so they were weighing it up and saying, will I feel better off? And they were really worried. As everyone has said, it doesn't close the funding gap. The money does just about cover the growth in activity and inflation this year that's projected. So first of all, to acknowledge that. On the margin point, look, what we said to government was there's no real science to what level margin allocation should be. And they kind of admit that. They don't know whether 1.1 billion is sufficient. We suspect it's not. So what we said to them was we've got to work incredibly closely together, not least because we think there's to be some impacts of global shocks on the medicine supply chain in coming months. So we said we've got to actively monitor this, but more important than that, that's why we now need to seriously look at reform to the margin system. And there may be some short-term points, which is to say, are there better ways to improve distribution or the immediacy of measurement and to be more sensitive to what's going on in the market? So are there quick wins to improve it, but also to look at more fundamental reform? Are there alternative models and systems, whether that's benefit sharing or other approaches in other countries, that would deliver a better system? And crucially, that contractors, as Reena said, can see the link between what they're doing and what they're paid and actually understand that. But there are upsides and downsides to those models, and that some of those are quite fundamental questions. And I'm not sure we should pretend that everyone knows that the sector agree on what the answer is, because there will be, in any options, there'll be winners and losers. So that's important. On the reform agenda, it is critical, and there are three main areas that we've identified. A meeting with the minister shortly, and we asked for this reform agenda. We met with the minister during negotiations and he committed to that. And so we'll be meeting with him very soon, and we will be going through to work out the work programme. And it's a big work programme, and it will be complex for us. as CPE, but as a sector to work out what is in our best interest and where we want to go. So 3 areas. One will be about margin reform, as I've mentioned. One will be what clinical services future do you want from us? And therefore, what kind of network do we need to be able to deliver for patients and communities? And then thirdly, in order to achieve those, what kind of contract funding and reimbursement mechanisms do we need? This is not a simple work program. We're going to have to set timelines. We're going to have to work really closely with them. And we're going to have to work really hard as a sector to work out what proposals we favour and where we should land. So that's a significant program of work. And we want to make some progress before next negotiations start, but some of these may be more fundamental and longer term.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Given then where we are and contractors have a year ahead of them, what would you advise as experts in the sector that people focus on? I'm wondering whether we can get some sort of checklist together. Malcolm, have you got anything to start with?
Yeah, I think just reflecting on everything that's been said about where we stand as a sector and where the funding is, I think there's a lot of anticipation about the whole clinical future and the direction of travel, especially with prescribing coming on board, with the changes that are going through the NHS. And I think it could be easy to spend a lot of time focusing on those and at the detriment of the core business. So I think, given the fact that workload is continue to increase, and I think we've established that the remuneration for that workload is still short of where it needs to be, I think businesses will really need to double down on focusing on their sort of operational discipline in their core business, looking at efficiencies, challenging how they do things, looking at skill mix within the organizations, trying to find efficiencies. And as we know, within the wider economy, the cost of doing business is growing. And so what can businesses do to improve productivity and to streamline and look at workflow within their businesses to ensure that they are as lean and as efficient as they can be, whilst also not ignoring the opportunities that come from the clinical future. I think that is where the direction of travel. That's obviously where the NHS and government see a role for community pharmacy, but we mustn't do that at the detriment of the core business.
Thank you. Olivier, what are your members saying?
Well, look, you want to know what we should do more of and what we should do less of. So I'll give you a checklist, as you said. 3 things, really. I would encourage contractors to do more of 3 things. The first one is understand their numbers. Unfortunately, the days when pharmacy owners couldn't run a business largely on prescription volume has gone. Owners, and I've done this through presentation to members, owners need absolute clarity on dispensing profitability, on service income, on workflows, on cash flow. That's essential. You can't run a business without understanding your numbers. The second thing is to invest in clinical capacity. Look, as I said to you earlier, independent prescribing is coming, whether you like it or not. Pharmacies need to build clinical capacity early so that they can be positioned, whatever the future brings. And if those that don't do that will struggle to adjust quickly. And the third thing is to engage politically. I've stopped counting the amount of 4 a.m. start that I've had to go and speak to the media, and the number of interviews that I've done in my pharmacies, as have many of our members. And actually, the lesson from the last 2 years is that when pharmacy speaks loudly and consistently, people listen. And you have seen that in the last 2 years, we have had, as Janet presented at the beginning, the biggest increase in primary care. And what should people do less of? Well, again, 2 things. The first one is they should have less reliance on what next year's contract is going to bring. As Reena said, contractors want to know whether they will be able to invest in their business. But unfortunately, the current system, the current pharmacy funding, it doesn't allow that. And people will need business strategies that ensure that the funding allows them to remain afloat. And then the second thing is less acceptance on unprofitable activity. And the NPA has been very clear for the last 2 years. We have been too good over the years at saying yes. We need to become better at understanding the true cost of delivering services, and we need to be, true to ourselves and stop doing the things that are not economically viable. And the last thing that I would leave you all with is, we need to stop confusing activity with sustainability. We can't rely on item alone. Doing more work is only good if the funding follows the work. But unfortunately, as we know, for the last 10 years, in this case, it hasn't. And therefore, we need to adapt.
Thank you. Sounds like some tough decisions are needed. Shilpa, what are you recommending to contractors?
I think that contractors really need to start looking, similar to what Malcolm said around efficiencies. So that may be embracing some sort of automation and looking at the skill mix and making sure that everyone's working at the top of their license. I think we need to start exploring AI as long as it's used safely. I don't think we do enough of that at the moment in pharmacy. So I think they're the kind of things that people need to start looking at. I agree with Olivier in that we really do need to start thinking about independent prescribing and looking at what we do, in a bigger clinical capacity. And that's not necessarily just for the contract, but you may need to start branching out into private services. And that's where you could use your independent prescribing qualification. So they're the kind of things I think people need to start looking at and doing a bit more of, and really analysing, as Olivier said, their business. And I think that's something that contractors often don't get time to do at the moment. They don't get a day out without the phone ringing, without messages coming through, where they can purely reflect and create a sort of a 90-day plan, a 6-month plan, and an annual plan of how they're going to deliver in their business. I think the other thing that really people need to do, when I think about kind of the number of pharmacies we have in London that are close to each other, is around working together and having that one voice, not just nationally, but also locally within a little neighbourhood area. How do we ensure that there's consistency for patients, consistency for other disciplines within the primary care team and within the ICB, by everybody sort of singing off the same hymn sheet? That's really important. Less of, I think we'll always just say this, is around, not doing things for free. We've still got too many pharmacies doing things for free. And I just don't think we really can't do that anymore. So that's something that I really want everyone to explore and think about. Again, it's about working together locally to ensure that everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet.
Thank you. Reena, what about you? Do you have a plan together yet?
Yeah, and I guess I wanted to share what I've been doing over the last year. I've had a really tough year. Financially in our pharmacy, my own personal stress wise, dealing with all of that. And I guess my message to the contractors listening to this is to take on a daily leadership. Sometimes it's very easy to turn up to work and just plod along and think, I'll worry about this tomorrow, but there is no tomorrow if we don't worry about it today. And I've had to really wake up to that. So it's, for me, there's a couple of kind of mantras or kind of sayings that I say to myself throughout the day. One is one that my accountant told me when I had my crisis meeting with him last year, where I was in a really bad financial position and I just couldn't see my way out. And he said something to me that's really stuck with me. He said, Reena, stop being Mother Teresa to the pharmacy world. And that really hit home with me. And throughout my day, every day in pharmacy, I have so many Mother Teresa moments where I feel sorry for people. I'll say I'll go deliver for free. I do these things through goodwill, which for many years we could do with goodwill, and we could create that goodwill because the money was flowing, and we could create that goodwill by, doing discretionary services and things for patients. And now I question myself, Reena, stop being Mother Teresa. And then the other line that I say to myself quite a lot throughout the day is the Jerry Maguire line, show me the money. And I shout to myself, show me the money. And I say it to my team. If I hear them on the phone call for like 15 minutes with a patient just asking for advice for free on the phone, I will try end that conversation with a patient, because there's no money in that. I'm having to daily show my team where the money is, how the money is flowing into our pharmacy, and what they have always done we can't afford to do anymore, and how we have to change. And it's this tiny little bit of daily leadership that I think is helping my business to turn around. It's that, telling my team every day, show me the money, push for that blood pressure check, push for that extra sale of an item that will really help that patient, try convert patients for nominations. All of these little things about showing the money and not being Mother Teresa, I think are my kind of two big messages for the contractors listening to this today.
Thank you. Does that mean that you're having to compromise patient care in any way, or is it just looking at things differently?
That's always my red line. I will never do anything that crosses my professional boundaries or the level of care that I want to give to my patients. But I can also create healthy boundaries, for myself and for my team as well. And a lot of that is setting expectations of my patients who for many years have expected this a lovely service. And I've had to be really honest with them and say, look, we can't do what we used to do, I'm afraid. And they see it on the news, they see Olivier, they see all these people. I've been on the news, they've seen me on the news. They know that these conversations are happening around funding. They know that it's a real issue. So actually, if you're honest with your patients, they'll help me and support me as well. Many will try get me new patients. Many will try, support me to survive, because they all say they'll be lost without us. So I think engaging our patients and who are our biggest advocates is a real key to this for our survival.
Yes. And do you have any feeling from you personally that the pressure will be relieved a bit, or has it got a little bit better for you?
No, there's no reprieve in pressure. The pressure is there for all of us. And I guess it's, do we continue? Do we keep trying to survive and at some point we'll thrive, or do we give up? And I have those daily conversations with myself in my daily leadership chat every day. I come in the morning, right, this is going to be a good day. And by the end of the day, I'm walking back to my car thinking, oh, Reena, surely there's a better way to earn a living. And, I have this conversation with myself daily.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Janet, anything on this point helping?
Well, I think everyone's covered that very powerfully, and Reena's testament to what it feels like day to day is incredibly important, and we need to listen to that. Obviously, efficiency, obviously about skill mix and capacity to maximise patient care and diversification come to mind. But from our perspective at CPE, I think contractors should consider carefully about whether to engage with the IP service. And I say that because as part of our negotiations, we said this is an insufficient investment and it doesn't nearly cover the true costs of implementing the governance, the clinical care, the infrastructure, the digital requirements, and the amount of time and workload it will take. So I'd say consider that carefully. We've been in this position before when we had insufficient funding to support the contraception service introduction, and people thought carefully about whether to do that. We said to the government, you should actually introduce this as a national enhanced service and enable ICB commissioning, and then come back when you've got significant enough investment to make it work. We don't want to be set up to fail. So consider that carefully. The other thing I'd say, and I hesitate to say this, recognising workload issues Reena spoke so powerfully about, but think about the reform agenda and contribute, whether directly or through your sector body, to ideas about how we could improve the contractual framework and funding mechanisms, because that's the work we're going to be doing on behalf of contractors, and that's what's sorely needed if we're going to have any kind of future as a network. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned independent prescribing. I wanted to ask, for contractors who aren't independent prescribers, is now the time to go and try and get yourself on a course? Do we need to upskill the workforce into independent prescribing, or maybe as Janet's suggesting, it's maybe a little too soon? What does everybody think? Reena, did you want to talk on that?
I mean, I've been a massive advocate of IP. I want to be able to finish the episode of care of my patients, and it's so frustrating when I can't. So while I really welcomed the IP news in the new contract, the funding for it is what's creating the dilemma for me. I really want to deliver it. I can deliver it. I can do it in my sleep. As part of the Pathfinder program, I learned so much. I've grown so much as a prescriber. My ability to support patients is really, elevated, and I want to be able to use this service. And leadership, so IP is like a muscle. You need to flex it. And if I forget how to use it, I'll have to relearn everything again, and I don't want to do that. So I really want to do this service, but I also understand the the political story behind this, because we shouldn't be underselling ourselves. My other concern is we have a whole generation of pharmacists coming out of university, and I've got 3 trainees with me at the moment who are IPs, and I've been their DPP for the first time. The most rewarding experience supporting new trainees, and I really want them to go out into this world and flourish and use these skills, but I want them to be able to use those skills in community pharmacy. We are the biggest employer of pharmacists. And if they can't use that skill in our pharmacy, where are they going to go? We're losing our workforce again. We already lost so many when ours came out and GPs started taking on pharmacists. If we don't have IP embedded, then we'll lose our workforce. And as for the legacy workforce, yes, my second pharmacist, she wants to do IP this year, and I said I'll support her to be a DPP. But if I haven't got a service to, do the prescribing with, how can I be her DPP? So I'll end up having to give her time out to go somewhere else. So I want to keep my own staff. I want to retain our workforce. I really want to use my skills, but the money is just not on the money.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who'd like to go next? Olivier, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I can go next. I mean, to your question, is now the time to become an independent prescriber? Yes, absolutely, yes. I say that as somebody who is a strong advocate for independent prescribing. I am an independent prescriber as well. And as I said earlier, whether you like it or not, it's coming. The future pharmacist will be a prescriber. And as Reena said, every newly qualified this year is coming as a prescriber. And I think we are going to see a rapid increase in the number of prescribers. But there is a note of caution. Becoming an IP should not simply be viewed as a way of helping pharmacists to deliver more services. It must be properly supported, properly governed, and obviously, as Janet said, properly funded. The workforce challenge isn't training enough prescribers. I think it's creating an environment within our pharmacies where those prescribers can actually use their qualification, as Reena said, in our consulting room and not in other part of the health service. And look, I've just come back from Scotland. I was in Edinburgh yesterday, and many of you who would have heard me on the news, I've often quoted Scotland as an example. When they started 20 years ago, I think 2002 is when they started, they didn't have 100% of IPs in their pharmacies. And so I learned 2 things yesterday. The first one is, today in Scotland, we keep referring to them as the model. Only 50% of all pharmacies are using IPs in their pharmacies, not 100%. They didn't wait to have 100% of pharmacists to launch a service. And the second one is they have a true pharmacy first service. And again, I was confused about, well, Scotland has 27 conditions and in England we have 7. Not at all. In Scotland, they have a pharmacy consultation service. It's not for conditions. It's not following a referral pathway or a rigid protocol. It's actually, if someone walks in and they ask for advice, the pharmacy team will decide whether it's a pharmacy first consultation with OTC advice, whether there is a sale of a product, the supply of a prescription-only medicine through a PGD, or whether an independent prescriber is required. Okay. And in my opinion, that's not just visionary, that's inspiring. That's what we should be aiming for in England. And as I say, my biggest concern is not the supply of prescribers. It's ensuring that there is enough funding, enough governance, enough infrastructure so that we can deliver this in community pharmacy. But yes, and absolutely yes. Get on that journey now.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm, what's your perspective on IP?
I think I agree with Olivier and Reena. The future is going to be that, and I think as a profession, as a pharmacist myself, I think it's great to see it's coming through at last. We've done a lot of work in the background through making changes to supervision laws around enabling hub and spoke and so on to try and create an environment which pharmacists can safely prescribe in community. The challenges, though, remain, and actually it's not just challenges, but also risks that come with it. And again, not to sort of go what colleagues have already said, but if we end up in a situation where we trained up a load of pharmacists and they have the qualification ability to prescribe, but there's nothing to prescribe in community pharmacy, there is no effective service out there, then they will look elsewhere to work, and that then will drive up the cost of pharmacists, because in order to be able to retain them, costs will go up, and that at the moment businesses are really going to be struggling with that. And I think one of the disappointments of the announcement from last week is that whilst I think, we recognise that the headline figure is great, we're concerned that it won't all filter through to the bottom line for businesses, but also I don't think enough has been done to try and manage and reduce the risks and the actual costs of delivering at the moment. We're seeing the same level of workload expected from pharmacies, even though there's a recognition from government they can't afford to pay us to do what we're doing. So it's not enough, I think, to say to contractors, you need to stop doing the stuff you're doing for free. That's kind of obvious, and if people can't realise that for themselves, then they need to really reflect on their own business approach. The reality is what is being done to try and reduce the workload that contractors have to deliver within the contract itself, so that they can break even, so that they can make the decisions. Olivier talked about investing in clinical capacity. You need to invest in physical space within your business, in the training and development of the team, in the operating systems. But how can you do that if you don't know you're going to get a return on that, or what that is going to be and what that's going to look like in the future? I think it's really important that we take stock and understand what can be done to reduce the cost of delivering what we have to do currently, before we start focusing too much on what the potential could be and what the future could be. My fear is that, last year the government said they wanted to work with us to reform, and that they couldn't afford to close the funding gap. This year they're telling us they want to reform with us and they can't afford to close the funding gap. How long can we take these promises of reform and promises of finding money in the future before the network is unrecognisable from what it is today, and we're not able to deliver what the NHS needs us to deliver today for patients? I don't think we should get too hung up on designing the future. We need to sort out today, and either we need to find ways of increasing revenue from the NHS for delivering NHS services, or we need to find ways of reducing costs. And I think it's not just sort of government as well. I think other things seem to be coming up to make life difficult for contractors. So if we look at what the GPHC is currently doing around pharmacy technicians and the initial education and training of those, they're going to be increasing the standards, increasing the costs, increasing the time taken, without actually anything for an enhanced level of capability for technicians in pharmacies to deliver against. We're going to face the same problem with technicians that we potentially will face with prescribing pharmacists. They'll have a great level of qualification and competence, but nothing to be able to deliver within the community setting. And so effectively community pharmacy will be training up the workforce of other settings, which just drives up costs. So whilst I think it's really important and exciting to look to the future and the clinical opportunities that come with it, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that the cost of delivering today will get in the way of that possible future if we don't sort it out.
Thank you. Shilpa, what do you think? Is IP to be put on the back burner for now, or is it a great opportunity?
I think contractors definitely need to really consider whether the service is going to be viable for them. So that's taking aside what's happening in this current contract that's just been negotiated. I do think that people need to think about gaining their IP qualification. And part of that is because, WTE have got some free training places, which we know are only till the end of March 2027. We don't know if that's going to continue. So I would encourage people to try and get on one of those courses at the moment while they can. There are places available. I suppose the disadvantage or the difficulty, the challenge is finding a DPP. That's something that many of our contractors want to do, an independent prescribing course, but being able to get hold of a DPP is the real struggle. And we're doing some work in North East London where we've managed to get a group of GPs that want to be DPPs. We've set a fee that pharmacies can pay for that, but it's not as high as some of the ones out there that companies are talking about. So it's a bit of a lower fee because just as we don't want to do things for free, other healthcare professionals also don't want to do things for free, and they are giving up their time and supporting that pharmacist in becoming an independent prescriber. I think also we have got the 3,000 independent prescribers that will be qualifying, or just under 3,000 in a couple of months. And I think we need to think about what people want now when it comes to workforce. People want portfolio careers. So it's disappointing that we may not have a number of independent prescribing services for them to be part of. But I think we as employers maybe need to start embracing portfolio careers, and they may work a couple of days in a GP practice or a couple of days in secondary care and a few days in community pharmacy. But what that will do hopefully is keep up that skill for them, that skill set. And then when they do come to community pharmacy, they'll hopefully have a better understanding of how to be able to use that. So I definitely think we need to embrace independent prescribing as a qualification. We need to start thinking clinically when we're writing notes on services that we currently do at the moment. But it is obviously, contractors really need to consider whether the current service specification for independent prescribing is financially viable.
Thank you very much. Janet, anything else to say from that side?
Well, I echo what Shilpa just said. I've got a member of my negotiating team who's in his 60s, and he's just qualified as an independent prescriber. And so I salute that, because I think it's not just for young pharmacists, it's for everyone. It is independent prescribing is strategically important to us for future direction and clinical services, and we want it to be an NHS service. But if it's insufficiently funded or it's not going to be worth it for contractors at the moment, then I think we should continue to deploy independent prescribers in private services as part of that strategy for diversification. So I think that's incredibly important. But I echo what Shilpa said, because the last couple of days I've met a number of pharmacists who are independent prescribers who are working in a number of settings in community pharmacy and in GP practices, and they're getting that range of experience. And I don't think we should underestimate either that the new graduates will need an enormous amount of support. They're not going to just be there and off and running, and that does create challenges for businesses in terms of being able to support them properly. So, and I echo also what quite a bit of what Martin was saying there. We are highly regulated, and we need regulatory easements to enable us to be able to operate more effectively and to be more trusted as clinical professionals. So we put in a host of proposals into our negotiations for contract reform, for funding reform, and for regulatory easements. And that's what we'll be pursuing now. And I do think that I'm not too naive, but I'm meeting with Kinnock to set up the programme of work that we need to do. And I think he's taking that seriously, but we need to take it seriously as a sector, because let's say we were to say we want to be able to be funded for offering the service rather than for every interaction. Now, that's wholesale reform that would be needed in terms of the way we're funded. So that's no small ask of us in terms of working out the solutions to that.
Thank you very much. We've covered an awful lot of ground, and it's clear there's a lot going on. There's a lot to think about. There's positive points, negative points. I wonder if we could just finish by thinking about maybe some areas of innovation or something that gives you hope, maybe that you've seen out there, maybe something that contractors are doing that you thought might be the answer to the future. Is what would you have to say maybe to bring that's on the positive side as our sum up? Olivier, would you like to go first?
I can. Look, I'm known at the NPA and probably beyond as the eternal optimist, right? I always I'm a glass ready to deliver. I'm never half empty. I'm always half full. What gives me optimism is that community pharmacy has spent years proving what it can do. Today we're doing pharmacy first, contraceptive service, hypertension, case finding service. We've participated in vaccination program. We're now doing most of the COVID vaccination. Time and again, we've shown that when we are trusted, we deliver. I think the innovation that I'm seeing isn't necessarily just on technology. And yes, we talk about AI, but actually it's the mindset shift. More pharmacies are thinking clinically, and you see it because they offer private services, if not NHS services. More pharmacies are becoming prescribers, and we know that all the students are coming out, and therefore that will shape our future. More contractors are also looking beyond dispensing and asking what their role will be in sort of neighborhood health when it happens. And the irony in all this is that the government actually increasingly agrees with us. You just heard Janet talk about Minister Kinnock, who talks about, working with community pharmacy, shifting care out of hospital into community. And that's exactly what pharmacies have been arguing for absolute years. I've heard so many times Reena say, my clinic on the high street is exactly where all this can happen. So the opportunity that we have in front of us is enormous. But my warning to contractors, if there was one, is don't mistake this settlement for the destination. It's a staging process. The government made a step in the right direction last year. It made a second step, or being a baby one this year. So we still need funding reform. We need a fairer medicine reimbursement system. We have to stop dispensing at a loss. And we need services that are properly funded to a sustainable level. So, as Reena, Malcolm, and I said, we need to be able to invest in our team. And I think we have a great opportunity. For the first time in a long time, pharmacy is firmly in the national conversation. Our voice is stronger than ever. And if we stay united and if we stay ambitious, I think the next chapter for community pharmacy could be a good one. So this settlement is better than many people feared, but nobody should confuse it with sustainability. And the community pharmacy still needs fundamentally to reform itself. The NHS want to shift care into community. That ambition comes with community pharmacy. And if it doesn't, then it's unlikely to succeed.
Thank you. Janet, I know you're pushed for time. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think that's a very eloquent sort of picture of the future, and I agree with it. But I think for me personally, the thing that I've seen as transformative is when I've gone into pharmacies where they have invested in automation, dispensing software, maximising skill mix, to really streamline the efficiency and patient safety of dispensing, but crucially to relieve capacity for patient care, for advice and consultations. And I think that's really inspired me. And what it has inspired me is about the satisfaction that clinical professionals get from using those skills to help patients directly to complete their episodes of care and to be able to not push them off from pillar to post, but also the satisfaction from patients and the confidence that they have in the support they get from pharmacy. So I think that's been really transformative to me and kind of my visits around the country.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Shilpa, what's your perspective? Is there any optimism out there?
I think there is optimism out there. I think what I feel really proud about when I see what contractors do is how quickly we move with things and the pace at which we work. So obviously we've got COVID vaccination sites as an example, but even things like Pharmacy First, when that first launched, we had about 6 weeks to, get our heads around it. And in that time, we also had Christmas, which is the busiest time for pharmacy contractors, but we were all ready to go on the 31st of January. And so for me, I think that, when community pharmacy gets together and is happy about, I guess the service that they're going to be running, they really do get their heads down and deliver. There is lots of different innovation. So there is a bit around, contractors that are using some really sophisticated PMR systems, which tend to do a lot of the accuracy work for them so that they can devote that time into clinical services. And you've also got, obviously, robots, etc. But as Olivier said, I think for me, there's a lot around, using those clinical skills that we have in community pharmacy for private services. And it's about, the innovation is about kind of thinking, right, this is the area my pharmacy is in. What does the population near me need that is missing at the moment from the NHS? And then being able to develop and implement and execute that service. I think that's what I see some of our brilliant business owners doing. And it would be great to see a bit more of that with the, funding sustained at the NHS level as well. That would just really mean that we could do a lot more than what we currently do.
Great, thank you. Malcolm, what's it looking like ahead for you?
Yeah, I think Optimism. Am I feeling a lot of optimism out there? Not around the delivery of NHS pharmaceutical services. And I think, you know, it's interesting that a lot of people have been speaking about optimism for the future around delivering private things, around other opportunities for contractors. So there is some optimism out there, but unfortunately not a lot around the core delivery of core NHS services. I think, you know, the opportunity to reform, I think, is critical. I think I agree with Janet. We need to take this opportunity and to grasp it. I think what we need as a sector is to agree what the core principles we're going to be following as we go into any kind of change, any kind of reform. What are the key elements that need to be in any reformed contractual framework, and how might that play out? I think those are the kind of the key next steps, because I think the longer it takes to agree what reform looks like and then to implement it, the tighter things are going to get for businesses on the ground.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Reena, you talked very movingly about the challenge ahead for you as a contractor. What do you think about moving forward?
And I guess for me, it's a dose of realism. And I guess I'm happy to share my personal realism. I've set myself a 2-3 year plan. So in 28-29, my pharmacy, the actual building will have been a pharmacy for 100 years. My family will have run it for 50 years, and I will have run it for 25. And by 28-29, I have a plan A and I have a plan B. And I think my big message to the contractors out there is have a plan, because sometimes it feels relentless. Sometimes it feels like we're flogging a dead horse. And if we don't have a plan, it just gets harder for us and it gets more difficult and we burn out even more. And none of us are going to lie on our deathbed wishing we spent another day in the pharmacy. I am pretty sure of that. So for me, my top tips around the realism of where we are right now is have those plans in place. So for me, the plan is to create as many efficiencies as I can. I've already implemented new software for cascade buying so that my buying is really sharp and my margins are as high as they can be. I've implemented a new software, which includes accuracy checking, barcode scanning technology to free up my time. I've trained up my team to become dispensers and ACDs so that my time is very free now, and my time is spent doing things that show me the money. I'm doing more private services. And as someone who was so NHS and so altruistic through my DNA, it was really hard for me to start private services. But actually, I am loving delivering them. My patients are so grateful I'm offering these services from someone they trust already. I've put a second consultation room in. I've got 2 pharmacist model. I'm doing everything I can to create the environment where we should be flourishing. But if I get to 28-29 and I haven't flourished, and yet I've done everything I can to introduce all these efficiency, my plan B has to come in place, which is obviously turn myself into a Starbucks and build a couple of flats on top of my pharmacy. So, have that plan B and have that plan A. If I get plan A done and I get the efficiencies in place, then yes, expansion, doing even more is where I'd really love to be. But I've got to be realistic that you've got to have the 2 roads and the 2 forks ahead of you, work towards one, but have the backup plan B in case things go wrong, because we cannot continue flogging a dead horse.